An unknown warship entered Imperial space, and its message promised no mercy. The alarm did not build gradually. It did not chirp once, pause, then escalate. Every single alarm on the bridge of the Amaranth fired at the same instant, and the sound was so complete, so immediate, that Commander Yale Draven knocked her elbow against the navigation console before she even understood why her body had moved. "Contact," Lieutenant Owen Price said from the sensor station, and his voice carried the particular flatness that experienced officers use when they are frightened and refuse to show it. "Unknown configuration. No transponder. No entry corridor request. No deceleration pattern consistent with any registered drive system." Yale crossed the bridge in 4 steps. She leaned over his shoulder and looked at the screen. The contact sat at the far edge of Keth. Imperial sensor range, roughly 200,000 km past the boundary marker at Relay Station 9. It was not hiding. It was not accelerating. It was simply there, the way a stone is simply there when you find it in the middle of a road you have walked 100 times. "Run it against the registry," Yale said. "Already running," Owen said. "Nothing. Not Keth, not Third Rim Guild, not any neutral party vessel on record. The whole geometry does not match anything in the Imperial database." "Any database?" He paused just a half-second too long. "Any database I have access to." Yale straightened up. 60 years. That was how long humanity had been a client species of the Keth Empire, and in 60 years she had learned one reliable truth about Keth officers: they did not pause. They calculated, they assessed, they responded. They did not pause. The fact that Owen had paused told her the contact was doing something to him that sensor data alone could not explain. She looked at the shape on the screen. It was long, not wide the way a Keth dreadnought was. Wide, all lateral spread in surface weapons arrays. This vessel was long and narrow, like a finger pointing at something, like a statement rather than a weapon. Admiral Safran's voice came through the command channel before Yale could say another word. "All ships in formation. The unknown contact is to be hailed on all standard frequencies. If it does not respond within 90 seconds, we move to encirclement. Protocol 7. Yale noted the choice of protocol. 7 was not the protocol for an unknown civilian vessel. 7 was reserved for confirmed hostile actors. They hailed the ship. They hailed it in standard. They hailed it in high Keth, in low Keth, in the trade dialect used across the Third Rim. The ship did not answer. At second 83 it spoke first. The broadcast came across every open frequency simultaneously, which should not have been possible unless whoever was sending it had precise knowledge of every frequency the Keth fleet was currently using. The signal was clean, no static, no delay, no distance lag that should have been present at 200,000 km. It came through as though it were being transmitted from directly beside them. The voice was a woman's voice. Calm, unhurried, not the calmness of someone who is unaware of the 40 Keth warships now pivoting toward her on their approach vectors. The calmness of someone who is aware of every single one of them and has already decided how she feels about it. She spoke in standard first, then in Keth, then in 4 languages Yale did not recognize. But in Standard, the message was this: "We have been looking for you for a long time. We suggest you do not run." The bridge went quiet. Not the dramatic quiet of a room where everyone is thinking the same thing. The deeper quiet of a room where no one knows what they are thinking yet. Yale was thinking something. She could feel it moving at the back of her mind, slow and cold like water, finding its way under a closed door. She looked at the whole geometry again. She looked at the drive signature. She looked at the way the ship held itself absolutely still against the gravitational pull of the relay station's anchor mass, which required either exceptional passive stabilizers or a level of pilot skill she had only read about in theoretical training manuals. She had seen a design like this before, not in service, not in any active registry. She had seen it in a photograph, black and white, slightly blurred, tucked into the classified annex of a file she had been granted temporary access to 3 years ago during a routine treaty review. The file was labeled Project Warden, and the access note attached to it said, "Program discontinued by order of the Joint Keth Human Disarmament Board, Year 12 of the Accord. All vessels accounted for." All vessels. The word accounted for did not necessarily mean the same thing as destroyed. She had noted that at the time and filed it as a bureaucratic imprecision not worth pursuing. She was rethinking that decision now. "Commander Draven," Owen's voice was very quiet. "The contact is broadcasting on a second channel, a private channel. It is addressed to you personally, by name, by rank, by your exact posting." Yale felt the cold thing move a little faster under the door. A private frequency addressed to her by name meant whoever was on the ship knew her assignment, her posting, and her personal communication codes. Those codes were classified at a level that not even all Keth admirals had access to. The fact that someone on an unregistered vessel in deep Imperial space had them meant one of two things. Either there had been a security breach so massive that Yahoo could not begin to calculate its scope, or the person sending this message had been watching her long enough to obtain those codes through other means. "Put it through," she said quietly. "To my earpiece only." The voice was the same woman's voice from the open broadcast, but this time it was not speaking in Standard. It was speaking in Portuguese. Not modern Portuguese. Not the simplified version used in colonial administration documents. It was speaking in a regional dialect from a small coastal city in southern Portugal that had not been in common use for at least 40 years. It was the dialect Yahoo's grandmother had spoken at home. The message was 4 words. "We kept one Yahoo." She did not react. She had spent 6 years as a human officer embedded with Keth Command, and 6 years of that had taught her to keep her face the same regardless of what was happening inside her chest. She kept her face the same now. She looked at the sensor screen. She looked at the long, narrow ship, holding perfectly still at the edge of Imperial space. Something had been kept. Something that was supposed to be gone. Something that knew her grandmother's language, knew her private frequency, and had crossed 200,000 km of Imperial space in broad sensor range of 40 warships without blinking. "Admiral Sovereign is requesting your assessment," Owen said. "Tell the Admiral I am compiling my report," Yahoo said. She looked at the ship one more time. It still had not moved. It was not hiding. It was not threatening. It was waiting the way something waits, when it already knows how the next hour is going to go, and it is simply giving everyone else in the room the courtesy of catching up. Yael had spent her entire career learning to be comfortable in Keth space, comfortable in Keth protocols, comfortable with the particular, quiet shame of being the species that sat at the treaty table but never helped design it. She had made a kind of peace with it, the kind of peace that feels like wisdom, until the moment something comes along and shows you very gently that it was only ever resignation. She pulled up her personal log and opened a new entry. The entry had only one line in it when she set it aside to go speak to the Admiral. The line read, "That ship was built by human hands, but no human alive ordered it launched." She stood up. She adjusted her uniform. She walked toward the command channel station with the same measured steps she used for every crisis, every escalation, every moment in 6 years that had tried to make her react before she was ready. Behind her on Owen's screen, the unknown vessel continued to hold its position. It had not moved a single kilometer in response to 40 warships closing around it. It was, Yael thought, the most patient thing she had ever seen. And patience, she was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as peace. The Keth were not slow people. That was the first thing any human diplomat learned upon entering Imperial service, and it was the first thing they forgot when things stayed comfortable for long enough. The Keth moved fast, thought fast, and made decisions with a confidence that came from having run an 11-system empire for 4 centuries without a single serious challenge to their authority. You did not survive 4 centuries at the top of an interstellar hierarchy by being careless, which was why it was so striking to watch Admiral South Varen's tactical officers move around the command bridge of the flagship like men who had been asked to solve a problem that kept changing shape every time they reached for it. Yael stood at the edge of the flagship's observation gallery, where she had been summoned approximately 18 minutes after the unknown vessel's first broadcast. She had her hands behind her back and her expression arranged into the attentive neutrality that Keth officers expected from their human liaisons. She was not thinking about her expression. She was thinking about what she had seen on Owen's secondary sensor panel in the 30 seconds before she had boarded the shuttle to the flagship. The unknown ship's drive signature had resolved enough in that window for the Amaranth's analysis system to generate a preliminary technical profile. She was carrying that profile in her head because she had deleted it from every digital record before leaving the Amaranth. The drive system was old, 60 years old by metallurgical resonance analysis. The whole plating showed the fatigue patterns of a vessel that had spent decades in deep space, far from any repair facility, patched and reinforced in the particular improvised way that only happened when you had no access to a shipyard and had to make do with what you had carried with you. There were sections of the exterior hull that showed thermal scarring consistent with proximity to a red dwarf star, suggesting the ship had spent extended time in the outer orbit of at least one such system, probably using the radiation shadow as cover. That was the old part. The weapons were not old. Yael had looked at the weapons profile for exactly 11 seconds before committing it to memory and erasing the file. In 11 seconds, she had seen enough to understand that whatever had been mounted on that vessel in the last 2 decades had not been built from archive plans or salvaged components. It had been purpose-designed. The targeting geometry was built around Keth countermeasure frequency. Specifically, the range calculations were optimized against Keth hull density specifically. The energy output curves were sized to defeat Keth's shield harmonic. Specifically, someone had spent a very long time studying exactly one enemy, and then they had built exactly the tools to deal with that enemy. Commander Draven, a Keth tactical officer, appeared at her shoulder. His name was Velsora, and he was the sort of officer who communicated his low opinion of human intelligence through the particular way he made eye contact, as if he were performing a courtesy he had been ordered to perform. The Admiral requests your assessment of the contact's origin. The whole geometry is consistent with a human design framework from approximately 60 years ago, Yale said. She said it the way she had rehearsed it in the 18 minutes since she had erased the sensor file. Come, factual, offering exactly what a diligent human liaison officer would be expected to offer, specifically with the experimental deep range survey program that operated in the early years of the Accord period. Project Warden, Velsora said. Yale did not blink. You have that file. We have all relevant files, he said in the tone of a man confirming something he found mildly embarrassing about a subordinate species. Project Warden was a human military development program. It was discontinued and all vessels were surrendered under the terms of the Disarmament Accords Year 12. The final audit confirmed 6 vessels. All 6 were received, disassembled, and catalogued. 6, Yale said. 6, he confirmed. And this ship makes 7, Yale said. Velsora looked at the sensor display for a moment without speaking. Then he said, the Admiral is not drawing the conclusion officially at this time. What conclusion is the Admiral drawing officially? That the vessel is of unclear origin and may represent a third-party actor attempting to create a diplomatic incident between Keth and human interests. Yale kept her face very still. The explanation was elegant, and it was also nonsense, and Velsora was smart enough to know it was nonsense, which meant he was repeating it because it was the explanation that created the least amount of institutional disruption. If the ship was a third-party provocation, then the Keth had been tricked, which was manageable. If the ship was a 7th human vessel that had escaped the Disarmament Accords and operated in secret for 60 years, then the Keth had been wrong, which was a different category of problem entirely. The ship broadcast again. The same woman's voice, this time in standard only. We are aware that you are debating whether to fire. We want to save you the time. The answer is yes, you should try it. We have been waiting to show you what 60 years of preparation looks like. We leave the decision in your hands. Admiral South Warren, across the bridge, said something in High Keth that Yale's translation earpiece rendered as, this vessel is performing a threat display. It is attempting to create the impression of capability it does not possess. Yale had the drive analysis profile, her memory. She had the weapons geometry. She thought about saying something. She decided against it for the moment, and stored the decision the way she stored all her decisions when she was in Keth command space, carefully, quietly, at a depth where it would not show on her face. The ship still had not moved. She needed to get back to the Amaranth. She needed to access the restricted data core in the captain's archive, the one she had clearance to view but had never needed to open because in 6 years, nothing had ever risen to the level where she needed what was in it. It contained, among other things, the full unredacted version of the project Warden file, accessible only to human liaison officers posted to Keth Fleet Command on the grounds that such officers might one day need to identify and authenticate legacy human assets in the field. Legacy human assets. That was the official language. The language used when the people writing the documents wanted the content to sound administrative rather than extraordinary. She had been granted the clearance 3 years ago and had thought of it perhaps twice since, both times in the context of routine security training refreshers. She was thinking about it now in a different context. I would like to return to the Amaranth to compile a full assessment report, Yale told Velsura. I can have a preliminary brief to the Admiral within the hour. Velsura studied her for a moment. Keth officers were good at reading human body language. 6 decades of close observation had given them a working map of human tells. Yale had spent 6 years learning to flatten hers. The Admiral prefers you remain on the flagship, Velsura said. The research materials I need are on the Amaranth's data core, Yale said. I cannot produce a useful assessment without them. Another pause. 30 minutes, he said. A shuttle will remain on the docking bay and you will have a direct link to the flagship throughout. Of course, Yale said. The shuttle ride back to the Amaranth took 9 minutes. In those 9 minutes she watched the unknown vessel through the porthole. 40 Keth warships now formed a rough sphere around it, their formation lights creating a constellation of cold blue points in the dark. The unknown vessel sat at the center of that constellation and looked from this distance almost small. Almost. She was back on the Amaranth in 11 minutes ahead of schedule. She went directly to the captain's archive, keyed her override authentication, and opened the project Warden file. What she read in the next 14 minutes rearranged several things she believed to be permanent. Project Warden had not been 6 vessels. It had been 7. The 7th vessel, designated Warden Prime, had been removed from the official manifest 14 months before the disarmament accords were finalized. It had been removed by a standing order issued by a Human Council subcommittee, classification level above Yale's current clearance, and the removal was noted in the archive only as Warden Prime status amended. See Annex 7. Annex 7 was a single paragraph. It said that 63 volunteer personnel, all of whom had been officially declared deceased by means of various documented incidents in the months prior to the accords, had been assigned to a long duration mission of unspecified parameters. It said that all contact with Warden Prime had been suspended by mutual agreement of all participants to preserve mission security. It said that mission duration was open-ended and contingent on circumstances. 63 people declared dead, sent into the dark. 60 years ago. Yale sat with that number for a moment. 60 years. That was not a posting. That was not an assignment. That was a life chosen and surrendered, exchanged for something so important that 63 human beings had agreed to stop existing as far as the rest of humanity was concerned and had gone somewhere no one would look for them to do something no one would know about for as long as it took. Her private channel chimed. The same woman's voice. The one that spoke Portuguese like her grandmother. You found Annex 7, the woman said. It was not a question. Yes, Yale said. Good. Now you understand what we are. We need to talk before the Admiral makes a decision he cannot walk back. You have about 20 minutes before Velsura sends someone to collect you. Who are you? Yale said. The answer came without any hesitation, in the steady voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment and had long since moved through all its emotional weight. My name is Inez Draven. I am the captain of the Warden's Oath, and I am your great-aunt. I did not die in a shuttle accident 38 years ago. I made a different choice. I want to explain it to you if you will. Let me. And I want to ask you to make a choice of your own. Outside the porthole, the 40 warships held their positions. At the center of their formation, the Warden's Oath waited with the patience of something that had measured out its waiting in decades rather than minutes. Yale opened a new channel. I am listening, she said. The voice of Inez Draven was not what Yale had expected. She had expected something harder. 60 years of exile, 60 years of silence, 60 years of living in the dark between stars while the rest of humanity carried on without knowing she existed. Yale had expected that to leave marks in the voice, a roughness, a distance, the particular flattened quality that people get when they have been carrying something heavy for long enough that they no longer notice the weight because they have simply built their body around it. Instead, Inez sounded like someone describing a choice she had made this morning and was still at peace with. I was 29 when I signed the paper, Inez said over the secure channel. That is the first thing you should know. I was 29 years old, and I had already spent 4 years watching the Keth dismantle every serious human military program piece by piece, not violently, politely, through treaty language and inspection, clauses and deadline schedules. By the time the disarmament accords were being drafted, there was a working group within human government that had quietly calculated what would happen to humanity over the next 60 years if we entered those accords with nothing kept in reserve. The conclusions of that working group were not made public. You will understand why. The labor reclassification, Yale said. A short pause. You found that too. Velsura handed me the Project Warden file. I found my way to the rest. Then you know that the vote is in 72 hours. The Keth Imperial Council is going to reclassify every human citizen under Keth jurisdiction from protected client status to a labor resource category called Grade 4 domestic asset. The legal distinction is not subtle. Client status means negotiated rights, defined limits, treaty protections. Grade 4 asset means none of those things. It means the empire can relocate human populations, assign labor quotas, and revoke colony rights at administrative discretion without a treaty review. Yahel had read the document 3 times. in the archive to make sure she was not misreading the language. She had not been misreading it. How long have you known? We have been monitoring Keth internal communications for 16 years, Inez said. The reclassification project has been in planning for 11 of those years. They began building the administrative infrastructure for it 9 years ago. They have been moving slowly because they did not want it noticed before the framework was in place. 16 years. Yahel thought about all the routine reports she had filed over 6 years as a liaison officer, the assessments of Keth intentions, the evaluations of treaty stability. She had characterized the relationship as strained but functional. She had characterized the Keth as an empire in gradual decline that was becoming more conservative rather than more aggressive. She had been looking at the visible surface of a structure and writing confidently about what was underneath it. You said you needed a witness, Yahel said. The warden's oath cannot do this alone. Inez said. We can force a standoff. We can demonstrate capability. We can make the cost of the vote very clear to the people who have to cast it. But a standoff without documentation is just a threat, and a threat without witness testimony that can be independently verified is just a story. The Keth can dispute later. We need someone inside Keth Command who was present for what is about to happen, who has access to the original documents and who can transmit everything to every human authority and every neutral diplomatic observer in range before people realize what is happening. Yahel understood the shape of what was being asked. It was not a small shape. If I transmit Keth classified Keth intelligence from within a Keth flagship's communication range, I am ending my career. I am probably ending my freedom. The Keth do not treat data breach as a minor violation. No, Inz agreed. They do not. You are asking me to burn everything I have built in 6 years. I'm asking you to decide what those 6 years were for. The channel was quiet for a moment. Somewhere in the middle of that quiet, Yao thought about all the small negotiations she had made with herself over the years, all the time she had looked at a Keth policy that bothered her and told herself that stability mattered more than principle, that keeping the relationship intact served human interests better than any individual act of resistance. All the time she had chosen the long view and trusted that the long view was wisdom. She had been choosing the long view inside a room where the ceiling was already coming down. Tell me about the crew, Yao said. Tell me about the people on that ship. The brief pause that followed was the first time In's voice had changed at all. It did not become less steady. It became something else, something fuller, the way a voice sounds when the subject it is approaching matters more than anything it has said up to that point. There are 141 people on the Warden's oath, In said. Of the original 63 volunteers, 39 are still alive. The others died over the years. Equipment failures, medical situations that a full hospital could have handled easily, accidents that happen in deep space when you are 60 years from a repair facility. Each of them chose this. Each of them knew the terms when they signed. None of them at the end expressed regret about the choice. I watched all of them go, and I can tell you that as a fact, not as a comfort. Yao did not speak. The other 102 are their children and grandchildren, Inz continued. Some of them have never been on a planet. They were born in deep space. They grew up in deep space. They trained in deep space. They know what Earth looks like from photographs and from descriptions and from the particular way the older crew members go quiet sometimes when they think no one is watching. They have never breathed unrecycled air. They have never felt real gravity that was not generated by a ship's drive. Do they resent it? Yale asked. Inns considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Some of them went through periods of anger when they were younger. That is natural. You grow up being told that the thing you are sacrificing is worth it, and at some point you are old enough to ask whether that is a decision that should have been made for you. We did not try to shut that anger down. We let it run its course. What came out the other side of it, in almost every case, was not resentment. It was something more like understanding. They chose their parents' mission not because it was inherited, but because they looked at the evidence themselves and reached the same conclusion. What evidence? The same evidence you are sitting with right now, In said. The reclassification documents. The rate of Keth policy shift over 6 decades. The way the treaty language has been quietly amended 11 times in 60 years. Each amendment small, each one moving in the same direction. You can look at any one of those amendments and tell yourself it is a minor adjustment. You can look at all 11 in sequence and understand that it is a plan. Yale was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question she had been holding since the first broadcast. Why now? Why this moment, this system, this particular formation? Because the vote is in 72 hours, Inns said, and because the Keth did not know we existed until approximately 40 minutes ago. We needed to reveal ourselves at a moment when reversal was still possible. If we had waited until after the vote, the administrative infrastructure would already be in motion, and stopping it would require the KAF to admit public error on a scale that their political structure does not allow. We needed to arrive before the door closed. And you needed me here, Yale said. We have been tracking your posting for 3 years, Inez said. We needed a human officer with access to both the classified documents and the KAF Command Communication Network. You are the only such officer currently assigned to this fleet. If you had been posted elsewhere, we would have waited for another opportunity. But you were here, and the timing aligned. The thought that the crew of the Warden's Oath had been tracking her posting for 3 years, had been building a plan that included her as a specific variable, sat in Yale's chest in a strange way. It was not entirely comfortable. It was not entirely uncomfortable. It was the feeling of discovering that something larger than yourself had been taking you seriously for a long time, without your knowledge. I need to ask you something, Yale said, and I need you to answer it honestly. Yes, Inez said. Did anyone on the Warden's Oath have a choice about being born into this mission? The silence that followed was long, enough that Yale wondered if she had asked something Inez could not answer. But when the voice came back, it was the same steady voice, carrying now a weight that had clearly been lived with for many years. No, Inez said. They did not choose to be born into it. That is the thing I carry with me every day. I can tell you that we tried to give them as much of a real life as a ship can hold. I can tell you that the older crew loved those children with everything they had. I can tell you that we answered every question honestly, and we never pretended the sacrifice was small. But I cannot tell you that what was asked of them was fair. It was not fair. It was necessary, and it was not fair. And both of those things are true at the same time. I stopped trying to resolve them years ago. Yale opened a new data window on her terminal. She began pulling the documents she would need. The reclassification file, the Project Warden Annex, the Keth Council's vote schedule, the Independent Diplomatic Observer, frequencies registered in this sector. Velsura is going to notice what I am doing the moment I start transmitting. She said. Yes, In said. He will have approximately 90 seconds to cut your signal before the packet reaches the relay array. We will make sure those 90 seconds are very busy for him. How? Admiral Safir is about to receive a very interesting communication from the Warden's Oath, In said. It will require his full attention and the full attention of every tactical officer on the flagship. It will not leave anyone with spare capacity to monitor a liaison officer's outbound data traffic. What kind of communication? The kind that answers every question the Admiral has been forming about our capability, In said. Clearly and in detail, and with a live demonstration attached. There was something in In's voice at that moment that Yale had not heard in any human voice in 6 years of service aboard Keth vessels. It was not anger. It was not excitement. It was the voice of someone who had spent 60 years doing a very specific job, had done it with absolute care and patience, and had arrived at the moment when the job was ready to be done. Yale looked at the documents on her screen. She thought about her career. She thought about 6 years of small negotiations with herself. She thought about 39 elderly men and women on a ship in the dark who had given their names and their lives and their futures to a question that the rest of humanity did not even know was being asked. She began preparing the transmission packet. Anise, she said. Yes. Your Portuguese is very good. My grandmother's dialect specifically. Your grandmother taught it to me, Anise said. We grew up in the same house. She used to say it was a language for people who kept their promises. Yale did not respond to that. She could not have explained why, except that there are moments when a sentence lands somewhere past the point where words can follow it. This was one of those moments. She kept building the packet. The documents lined up in her queue, ready to go, waiting only for the moment when Soth Varen's bridge was looking somewhere else. On her sensor feed, the Warden's Oath still had not moved. It was, she had decided, the most human thing she had ever seen in space. Not the technology, not the weapons, the patience, the willingness to wait and wait and wait until the moment was exactly right, and then to move without hesitation. She was almost ready. The first thing Admiral Soth Varen received was not a weapon. It was a message. The Warden's Oath transmitted it at full broadcast power across every Keth military frequency simultaneously, which meant that every ship in the formation heard it at the same moment, which meant that 40 captains and their crews were all reading the same words at the same time as the Admiral. This was not an accident. The targeting of Keth military frequency specifically was itself a demonstration, quietly, of how precisely the Wardens Oath understood the fleet it was facing. The message said, in the interest of clarity, we will now show you what we are capable of. We will select 3 targets from your formation. We will disable their propulsion systems. Only. No crew will be harmed. This is not a negotiating position. It is a courtesy so that when the conversation begins, we are all speaking the same language. Sothvaren's response came in approximately 4 seconds, which was fast, even by Keth standards. All ships maximum shields immediate. Engagement formation. Destroy the target. 38 warships open fire. Yale was watching it on the Amaranth sensor feed. She had her transmission packet loaded and waiting. She was watching Belsora's position indicator on the flagship schematic, watching the command bridge light up with tactical activity, watching every attention on the ship point outward toward the contact and the sudden storm of weapons fire converging on it. The Warden's Oath moved for the first time. Yale had been trying to prepare herself for this moment since she had first read the weapons profile. She had told herself, you know it is fast, you know it has been engineered for this specific situation, do not be surprised by it. She was surprised anyway. It did not dodge. Dodging implied a reactive system, something that saw the incoming fire and moved to avoid it. What the Warden's Oath did was something different. It was already moving before the fire reached the position it had held so still for 3 hours. It was moving in a direction that the Keth targeting systems had not predicted, because the direction was not a straight line and it was not a standard evasion arc. It was a path that existed in the space between the firing vectors of 4 ships simultaneously, a path that required someone to have calculated exactly where those ships would be, aiming based on their formation, positions, and their known targeting protocols, calculated in advance, probably weeks in advance. 23 seconds after Southvarin gave the engagement order, the Warden's Oath had not been touched. It had also covered approximately 60,000 km of distance, repositioned itself to the flanking edge of the formation, and discharged 3 precise bursts from a weapons array that Yale had not seen open on the hull until this moment. 3 Keth ships in 3 separate positions went dark on the sensor feed. Not destroyed, not burning, dark. Their drive signatures dropped to 0. Their weapons arrays went offline. Their power curves flatlined to life. Support minimums. 3 ships disabled in 90 seconds from 60,000 km of separation against full shields, using a weapon system that had been engineered to find exactly the frequency harmonics that those shields did not cover. 60 years of work delivered in 90 seconds. Yale started transmitting. The packet was large but structured for speed. She had built it in compressed bursts, rather than a single stream, which meant that even if Velser, as people cut her signal partway through, the sections already transmitted would be independently readable. The reclassification documents went first because they were the most important, then the Project Warden Annex, then the Keth Council vote schedule, then her own personal log entries from the last 4 hours, time-stamped and authenticated. She had set the destinations before the engagement started. every human colonial authority with a receiver in range, every neutral party diplomatic mission, registered in the sector, the 3 independent observer vessels whose frequency she had found in the registry, and one specific address that INS had given her before the transmission began, a relay point in deep space that she had been told would forward the package to 11 additional locations, the nature of which INS had not specified. Yale sent it all and watched the progress bar on her screen. On the main sensor feed, the warden's oath was still moving. South Varan had reorganized the remaining 37 ships into a tighter response formation, which was the tactically correct response, and also Yao could see from the engagement data streaming across her console exactly what INS had expected him to do. The tighter the formation, the more predictable the firing vectors. The more predictable the firing vectors, the more precisely the warden's oath could move between them. 4 more ships went dark. Velsura appeared on the Amaranth's communication feed. His face was very still. Commander Draven, I see an outbound data transmission originating from the Amaranth. You are ordered to terminate it immediately. I am transmitting my assessment report. As previously agreed, Yale said. The transmission size is not consistent with an assessment report. I found more material than expected in the data core, she said. Velsura looked at something off-screen. For a moment, Commander, terminate the transmission, or I will have it terminated remotely. Yale looked at her progress bar. 71%. I will terminate it when it is complete, she said. Velsura cut the feed. 11 seconds later, a remote override attempt hit the Amaranth's communication array. Owen, who had been watching Yale's screen the entire time and had not said a single word, calmly blocked the override using an emergency human protocol authentication that the Keth remote system did not have the decryption keys for. He looked at Yale. She looked back at him. He nodded very slightly. 88%. On the sensor feed, the warden's oath swept past the edge of the formation on a long arc and discharged again. 2 more ships. The disabled vessels were not destroyed. They were drifting, intact, crew alive. All systems running except the ones that allowed them to fight or maneuver. The message was very specific, and it was being delivered in real time in front of every ship in the formation. We can do this to all of you. We have chosen not to. We are choosing this outcome because we want to talk, not because we have reached our limit. 97%. South Varan's voice came through on the fleet-wide channel, not the command channel, the open channel. Stand down from engagement formation. All ships position. The weapons fire stopped. The warden's oath slowed. Not stopped. Slowed the way you slow when you are choosing to stop rather than being forced to. It repositioned itself toward the center of the formation where it had started and held still again. 100%. Yale's transmission packet was gone, scattered across the relay network in 11 different directions, already beyond any power in the system to retrieve. She breathed once carefully and then looked at the sensor screen. The warden's oath sat in the center of 41 Keth warships, 7 of which could no longer move under their own power. It had not fired a single lethal round. It had not destroyed a single piece of Keth hardware beyond use. It had warped into the center of an Imperial fleet, taken everything the fleet had to offer and responded by leaving it intact and functional on the condition that the fleet stop. On the open channel, the voice of Inez Draven was calm and clear and entirely without heat. Admiral South Varen, we understand that what has happened today is difficult. We are not trying to embarrass the Empire. We are trying to save an arrangement that is about to become something neither of our species will benefit from. The vote scheduled for 72 hours from now must be cancelled. The disarmament accords must be renegotiated with human representatives, given full standing at the table. Every human currently held under informal labor arrangements entered into without proper consent documentation must be released within 90 days. These are not demands. They are the terms under which humanity will agree to remain a partner in Imperial space rather than something else entirely. We would prefer the partnership. We chose to come here rather than to any other option available to us because we would prefer the partnership. But we want you to understand that the other options are real and that we are patient. The channel was quiet. You have the documentation you need to understand why we are making this request. Inns continued. Commander Yale Draven of the Amaranth has just transmitted it to every relevant party in range. By the time your response is formulated, there will be no version of events in which this conversation did not happen. We are past the point of erasure. What is left is only the choice. South Varen took 47 seconds to respond. 47 seconds for a Keth admiral who had never in his career paused for more than 5. We will take your request to the appropriate council bodies, he said. Finally, thank you, In said. We will remain in the area. Take whatever time you need. Yale sat back from her console. Her hands were completely steady. She was slightly surprised by that, though she supposed she should not have been. She had made the decision before she started the transmission. The steadiness was just the body catching up with the choice the mind already finished making. Owen was very quiet at his station. Then he said, without looking away from his screen, for what it's worth, Commander, I blocked that override because it was the right thing to do, not because I was ordered to. I know, Yale said. Thank you. They sat in the quiet of the bridge, while the Keth fleet held its position, and the Warden's oath sat at the center of everything, patient and still and utterly, completely present. Outside in the dark, the 7 disabled ships drifted in slow arcs, all their crew alive and safe, waiting for someone to come collect them. Yale thought about the choice of not destroying them, about the specific, deliberate restraint of an action that said, we were here for 60 years and we came back the way we did because we are not what you hoped we were not, and we are not what you hoped we were. She wrote one line in her log. The hardest thing to face is not an enemy that wants to destroy you. It is one that simply wants you to finally be honest. Yale boarded the Warden's oath for that first time at 3:40 hours local fleet time. The shuttle from the Amaranth crossed the distance between the two ships in silence. The Keth formation had held its position for 11 hours since the stand-down order. None of the 7 disabled vessels were covered yet, none of the remaining ships moving without permission from the fleet command channel. South Varen had established a perimeter that was technically an encirclement and Practically an acknowledgement that no one in the formation had any idea what to do next. The docking sequence was handled by a young man named Callum Draven, In's grandson, who could not have been more than 23 years old and had his grandmother's same quality of stillness. He guided the shuttle in with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this since before it felt like an event. And when the airlock opened, he greeted Yale with a short nod and the particular courtesy of a person who was not sure exactly how much emotion this moment was supposed to contain. Yale did not know either. She filed that uncertainty away and looked around at the corridor. It was alive. She had been on Keth military vessels for 6 years. They were clean, orderly, efficiently designed, every surface and every object exactly where regulations required it to be. The warden's oath was none of those things. The corridor walls carried decades of small modifications, cable runs added at angles that suggested they had been done quickly during a moment of need rather than planned into the design. There were hand prints on the upper bulkhead near a maintenance panel that had clearly been opened many times. The floor plating near the airlock had been replaced with a slightly different alloy at some point, newer and shinier than the surrounding plates. The repair obvious and unpretentious. There was a photograph taped to the wall beside the airlock door, not printed on official material, printed on ordinary paper, the edges slightly yellowed, one corner lifted, where the adhesive had aged. It showed a coastline, a rocky beach, gray-green water, a strip of pale sand at the base of dark cliffs. There was no caption, no date, no label to explain what it was a photograph of. Yael knew what it was a photograph of. She had seen that coastline in her grandmother's old albums. She stood and looked at it for a moment. Callum waited without comment, which was the right thing to do, and Yael made a note about this 23-year-old man who had never been on a planet and had still somehow learned exactly when to be quiet. They walked through 3 more corridors before Yael began to see the rest of it. The wall near the crew quarters section had a long section of handwritten names, not engraved, not printed, written by hand in several different styles of handwriting, names added at different times over what must have been decades. Some names had dates beside them. Some had a small mark next to them, a horizontal line, simple and unornamented. She counted the marks without meaning. 2, 16. The crew common area was in use. 4 people sat at a table playing cards. A 5th was at a workstation in the corner running a diagnostic on something Yael could not identify. They all looked up when Yael entered and looked at her with the frank, open curiosity of people who had been in a small enclosed community for a very long time and had no particular social reason to pretend otherwise. They were not unfriendly. They were simply honest. They have been waiting for this, Callum said quietly. Most of them have grown up hearing about it. What today would look like. What it would mean. Is it what they expected? Yael asked. Callum thought about it carefully. It is smaller than the stories, he said. All important things are smaller than the stories. But it is real, and real is better. Inez Draven was waiting in the captain's cabin at the end of a long corridor. The door was open. She was standing at a narrow viewport, looking out at the Keth formation and Yale had a full 3 seconds to look at her before Inez turned. She was old. That was the first thought, and Yale was not proud of it, but it was honest. 60 years of deep space, 60 years of rationed sunlight and recycled air, and the particular physical toll of living in artificial gravity had left there marks. Inez was perhaps 82 or 83. She stood straight. Her face was deeply lined, and her hair was white, and her eyes were the particular dark brown of the Draven family which Yale had seen in her own mirror every morning for 38 years, without ever expecting to see it here. "You look like your grandmother at your age," Inez said. "You look like the photograph in her album," Yale said. "The one with the beach." Inez smiled. It was a real smile, not a performative one. "She took that photograph the week before I left. I asked her to. I knew I would not see it again for a long time." They sat across from each other at the small table in the center of the cabin. The surface of the table was marked, the way all surfaces on the ship were marked by use and time, in the small physical record of a life being lived on it. There was a mug sitting to one side, still holding a little warmth. There was a handwritten note on a scrap of paper, clearly mid-thought. There was a small plant in a narrow container near the viewport, trailing its leaves against the glass, alive and green, and somehow the most startling object Yale had seen all day. "How long has that been growing?" Yale asked. Inez glanced at it. "That particular one? About 11 years. It is a cutting from a cutting from a cutting. The original came aboard with one of the first crew, a man named George Pell, who had been a gardener before all this. He died about 22 years ago. The plant is still going." George Pell. Yale added the name to the small internal list she had been keeping since she stepped through the airlock. The 16 marked names on the wall. The plant from the man who had been a gardener. The photograph of a beach that a woman had asked for the week before she chose to disappear. "I need to tell you what is happening on the diplomatic side," Yale said. She pulled herself back to the practical, because the practical was what mattered now, and because if she stayed in the personal, she was not sure she could stay steady. South Varan has been in contact with the Imperial Council. The Council has not canceled the vote yet. They have suspended it pending review, which is their language for, we are not going to say no immediately, but we are also not going to say yes in public. They are buying time to assess the political damage from my transmission." "How wide did it go?" Inez asked. "I reached 4 colonial authority receivers, 2 independent observer vessels, and 1 neutral diplomatic mission before the block. Your relay handled the rest. I do not know exactly where it went from there. It went to 11 human independent media outlets registered outside Imperial jurisdiction," Inez said, "and to the full assembly of the Free System Coalition. It will be public within 6 hours if it is not already." Yale nodded. "Then the Council cannot pretend it did not happen. The question is whether they choose to negotiate or whether they choose to treat this as a hostile incident and apply pressure through other channels." "They will negotiate," Inez said. She said it without heat, the same way she said everything. "Not immediately, not gracefully, but they will negotiate. We did not destroy anything. We did not harm anyone. We gave them every opportunity to stop. Before we demonstrated capability, and they did not stop, so we demonstrated it. The record of events is entirely unfavorable to a narrative in which we are the aggressive party. They know this. That was deliberate, Yale said. Every part of today was deliberate, Inez said. We had 60 years to plan it. Yale thought about saying something. About those 60 years. About the cost of them. About the 16 names on the wall in George Pell's plant and the 102 people who had been born into a mission without choosing it. She had been carrying those thoughts since Inez had described them on the channel, and she had not known whether to put them down or keep holding them. She chose to hold them. I need to ask you something, she said. You want to ask me about the children? Inez said. Yes. You want to ask if I think it was right? Yes. Inez was quiet for a long time. Outside the viewport, the blue lights of the Keth formation drifted in slow orbit. The plant moved slightly in the current from the ventilation system. I have been asked that question by every person born on the ship at some point in their life, Inez said. Most of them asked it when they were young, when the anger was fresh. I always told them the same thing I am going to tell you now. I do not know if it was right. I know it was necessary, and I know that the two things are not the same, and I have never tried to pretend they were. What I can tell you is that I watched those children grow up. I watched them become people, not just mission personnel. People with opinions about things that had nothing to do with the mission, with preferences and habits and jokes, and the particular ways they were like their parents, and the particular ways they were entirely themselves. Callum, who met you at the airlock, is studying orbital mechanics in his spare time because he thinks there is a more efficient class of insertion burn that no one has mapped yet. He may be right. One of the engineers, a woman named Ruth, has been composing music since she was 12, and it is extraordinary music. The ship's medic, a man named Daniel, has never met a patient he did not eventually befriend. They are full people. I cannot carry the cost of what they were not given without also carrying what they are, because it is all the same life. Yale sat with that. I am going to be appointed humanities diplomatic liaison for the negotiations, she said. It has already been proposed by the colonial authority. I have not formally accepted yet. I know, Inez said. I am going to need to use your intelligence files, the 16 years of monitoring, the full record of Keth policy shifts. They are being copied to your personnel archive right now, Inez said. Yale looked at her. You prepared for that too. We prepared for everything we could think of, Inez said. And the things we could not think of, we prepared to be flexible about. They sat for another long time without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had enough information to understand each other and were taking a moment before the next thing started. Then Yale said, she never stopped talking about you. My grandmother. She never told anyone you were alive, obviously, but she talked about you constantly. Stories from when you were young, the time you broke the fence gate and convinced her it had been the wind, the summer you both learned to sail on borrowed equipment that was too small for the water you were on. She talked about you so much that I felt like I knew you, and I was not even born until after you had already gone. Inez looked at the plant in its container by the viewport for a moment. She kept the language, she said. I can hear that. Your Portuguese is her Portuguese. She made me practice, Yale said. She always made the people she loved practice things, Inez said. She believed practice was love made visible. She stood, which Yale understood was a signal that the personal part of the meeting was coming to an end and the necessary part was about to begin. There is a lot of work ahead. The negotiations are going to be slow. The Keth are going to try to chip away at every term. They are going to look for technical language that gives back in the details what we have taken principle. I know how they negotiate, Yale said. Better than anyone, Inez agreed. That is why you are the right person for this. Yale stood too. She looked around the cabin one more time. The marked table, the mug, the handwritten note, the green trailing plant that had been growing for 11 years from a cutting from a man who had been a gardener. Will the warden's oath remain in that area, she asked. We will remain close enough to reach in a reasonable time, Inez said. We will not be visible. We have managed invisible for 60 years. A little longer is not a difficulty. The Keth are going to ask for proof of your location constantly during the negotiations. Let them ask, Inez said. Yale almost smiled. She went to the door. Then she stopped. Inez. Yes. What does it feel like arriving after 60 years? Inez looked past her at the viewport, at the drifting blue lights of the formation, at the stars beyond them. She took a breath that Yale thought probably held more than any answer was going to express. Like putting something down, she said. Not finished. Not resolved. But put down. The kind of weight you forget is weight until you are not holding it anymore. Yale nodded. She went back through the corridor, past the wall of names, past the common room, where the card game was still going, past the photograph of the coastline, with its lifted corner and its yellowed edges and its total absence of any label, because none was needed, through the airlock and back into the shuttle. The shuttle crossed the dark between the two ships. The Amaranth grew in the forward viewport. The Keth formation held its positions. All around, blue lights, patient and still, waiting for whatever happened next. Yale opened her log. She had been trying to write this entry for several hours and she had not found the right words yet. She tried again now. She wrote, we sent 63 people into the dark to become what the universe told us we were not allowed to be. They came back. That is the whole story. Everything else is details. She read it back. It was not the whole story. The whole story had 16 names on a wall, and a plant that had been growing for 11 years, and a grandmother who taught her a dialect that had not been in common use for 40 years and made her practice it every week because she believed practice was love made visible. She left the entry as it was. She would write the longer version later. There would be time. Owen was on the bridge when she returned. South Varon had sent 3 messages requesting her immediate presence on the flagship. The Colonial Authority had sent 2 requesting a secure briefing. The neutral diplomatic mission had requested an authenticated copy of the documents she had transmitted. She looked at all of it and thought about where to start. Shall I arrange a shuttle to the flagship? Owen asked. Yes, Yale said. 15 minutes. I need to draft a response to the Colonial Authority first. Understood. She sat down and opened the drafting screen. The negotiations were going to take a long time. The Keth were going to be difficult and methodical, and they were going to try every technical angle available. She knew their methods. She had spent 6 years studying them. She had also just spent several hours on a ship that had spent 60 years being more patient than anyone in this system had thought possible. She thought that patience was contagious if you let it be. She started writing. Outside in the dark beyond the Amaranth's hull, the warden's oath had already gone. It had slipped out of sensor range in the 11 minutes Yale had been on the bridge without a farewell signal, without a formal departure notification, without anything except the absence. Where it had been, it had left no forwarding address. Yale did not think it needed to. And